Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the International Alliance Meetings Day 2. I think we can all agree that yesterday got off to a great start for our first ever virtual Alliance meeting. And thank you to everyone who participated and presented. You know, in typical Canadian fashion, I feel like we should actually be talking somewhat about the weather. And as we've had a big dump of snow overnight, I think you might be pleased that we're in an alliance in the virtual meetings and not trying to get our flights in and out of Montreal today. Maybe we can share a bit of a picture outside our window a little bit later. It seems, speaking of getting lost along the way, that a few of us got lost during the coffee break and we're challenged a little bit to get back into the group networking. So just before we go to the break today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a demonstration on how it works to be able to get in and out of the group sessions. And speaking of today, I wanted to give you an idea of what we have in store for you. We all know that we're doing things a little bit different at the Alliance meeting this year. We have our best practice and idea sharing sessions from our member organizations, and we are taking a look at some of the deeper topics that require a bit more analysis. We will be doing a design workshop, and I will talk more about that later. We're hearing from other charitable communities as well about what they are doing and the challenges that they are facing. We all know that there are many parallels that we can draw from their community to ours. I'm very appreciative of the generosity of our charitable partners in being able to share this information. On that note, today we're going to start off with a presentation and question and answer period titled Cystic Fibrosis, a Comparative Study from Kelly Grover, Dr. John Wallenburg, and David Ramsden. After the CF section, we're going to see how many of our member organizations reacted, pivoted, and changed service delivery during the early stages of COVID-19 pandemic. Then we'll have a networking break, and the top half of today's meeting will be the much-loved ALS MND Connect. The Connect session will be live in this platform as well as streamed on Facebook Live, but you don't have to go anywhere. You can sit right there and you can see it from your computer again. Actually, it's similar to when we were in person with the platform and how we've streamed it in previous years. The ALS MND Connect session will be moderated by Dr. Nick Cole from MNDA, and in a nod to the fact that we should have been in Montreal, it will be kicked off by a Canadian who we know very well from our community. Adam Welburn-Ross lives here in Ontario, and so we're pleased to be able to have him join us to start that session. The panelists will be Christopher McDermott, Janice Robertson, Ludo van der Bosch, and Jinsey Andrews. I'm really looking forward to this great agenda, and it will give us the latest in research and we should have lots of time for questions and answers afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the podium over to our friends at Cystic Fibrosis.
Thank you, Tammy, and I am just sharing my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that now.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. So hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Grover, and I'm the CEO of Cystic Fibrosis Canada, as Tammy said. And thanks for joining us today. What we hope to cover today is first to align our voice with the slides, but is to tell you a little bit about our journey with cystic fibrosis to get access to treatments. And we're going to start with telling you a little bit about what cystic fibrosis is, some of the life-changing treatments that we've had and the impact on the disease. We're going to then share our UK access story, a little bit about our Canadian story to access, and then have a bit of a discussion with you. And I'm joined today with Dr. John Wallenburg, who's our Chief Scientific Officer at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and David Ramsden, who is the CEO of the UK Trust, or of the CF Trust in the UK. So I'm going to pass it to John, and then we'll hear from David.
Thank you, Kelly. And so just a little bit of the background behind the disease, because it's important, I think, to understand both the severity of the disease and the power of the drugs that were coming down the pipeline to understand the sense of urgency behind the advocacy efforts and the government relations that we were doing. So cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease. So as I said, as you saw in the recording, it's caused by mutations in a single gene. It's inherited. It's not acquired. So like blue eyes, red hair, it is recessive as well. And both genes need to be mutated for a child to have cystic fibrosis. It's estimated between 1 in 25 and 1 in 30 Caucasians as a carrier. I'm a CF parent and therefore a carrier. Carriers don't have signs of the disease. However, when two carriers get together, there's a 1 in 4 risk of children having cystic fibrosis. It is a rare disease with about 1 diagnosis per 3,600 live births. So it's one of the more common rare diseases, but it is a rare disease. It's now included in newborn screening in most of the Western world and most frequently diagnosed shortly after birth. Although it's caused by a mutation in a single gene, it's a multi-organ disease. Mutations in the CF gene lead to a defective protein called CFTR for short, doesn't matter why. It is expressed in the body systems that are in direct contact with the outside world. Think of, the organs that have mucus, your digestive system, the reproductive organs, but the most important clinical impact is in the respiratory system. Normal CFTR is an ion channel. It works like a window in the wall of the cell. It opens and closes and allows ion exchange, which in turn helps keep mucus liquid. There are over 2,000 mutations of the CF gene, and in many cases, protein is made, but it's mutated and it never gets installed in the wall of the cell, or if it does get installed, it doesn't work properly. This leads to thick, sticky mucus that causes problems like plugging up the tiny ducts that you have in the pancreas that produces the digestive enzymes that you need to digest your food, or along the walls of the intestine where it interferes with food absorption, or in the lungs where it can block the tiny airway passages and also serve as a medium for the growth of bacteria and fungal spores that people breathe in. This in turn leads to chronic infections. People with CF also have a poorly understood immune dysfunction that leads to cycles of excessive inflammation and infection, which in turn lead to lung damage, scarring, and progressive loss of lung function. 85% of people with cystic fibrosis will die of respiratory failure. Double lung transplants are the last recourse for end-stage disease, and patients are placed on transplant list once their lung function consistently falls below 30% of normal, at which point climbing a flight of stairs is a major accomplishment, as I said earlier. In the early 1960s, people who were born with cystic fibrosis were not expected to go to school. Median age of survival was in the single digits. Already by 1984, the median age of survival had increased to 25 years, and it has continued to increase almost 1 year for every year of research and clinical improvement over that time. So Canadians born with cystic fibrosis in 2019 have a median age of survival of 54 years. That's pretty incredible. But nearly all of that incredible progress has been achieved by treating the symptoms of the disease. The byproduct, a heavy treatment burden that includes a vast number of drugs to treat symptoms individually, one at a time. Intravenous or inhaled antibiotics to treat lung infections, enzymes to help digestion, or food supplements to help compensate for poor absorption, insulin for cystic fibrosis-related diabetes, anti-inflammatories to fight the inflammation in the lungs especially, and the list goes on. In addition, there are physical therapies to help clear the lungs. People living with cystic fibrosis typically spend between 2 and 4 hours of therapy daily just to try and stabilize their health and decrease the rate of progression. Patients typically attend hospital-based multidisciplinary clinics once every quarter. 10 years after the gene was discovered in Canada in 1989, our sister organization in the US, the CFS, started investing in drug screens to find a drug that would correct the problem. And using the deep understanding of the biology, those screens ultimately proved successful. The first drug was a drug called ivacaftor, sold as Kalydeco and approved in Canada in 2012. It is the first drug in the history of the disease that targeted the upstream cause of the symptoms rather than the symptoms themselves. And clinical impact was also very significant. When Kalydeco first came to market, it was believed that the loss of lung function was irreversible, and the success of ivacaftor was truly astonishing and hugely promising. 2 years after ivacaftor came to market, the second generation CFTR modulator came to market. It was a combination of two drugs, the first ivacaftor and lumacaftor, and the second of these was a combination of ivacaftor, tezacaftor. You can understand that since these drugs fix the defective protein, they're mutation specific to at least to a class of mutations. The second generation was hugely important because it targeted the most common mutation in the North American populations, called delta F508. So 50% of Canadians with CF have 2 copies of delta F508. However, the efficacy of the second generation of drugs was not nearly as good as the first generation. It only led to like a 3 or 4% improvement in lung function. Nonetheless, you could say, there were a number of patients, 1 in 8 would see an ivacaftor-like benefit. In spite of the clinical benefit of the second generation drug, the cost effectiveness of this drug was both deemed insufficient by the Canadian system, and neither drug ever got more than compassionate coverage through the public system and only in 1 province. While the rest of the OECD comparator countries slowly gained access to them, at least we weren't alone. The United Kingdom refused to pay for them as well. The cystic fibrosis community watched in great anticipation as the third generation of these drugs worked its way through clinical trials. Trikafta is a combination of 3 drugs, including the first generation ivacaftor. The clinical trial results were stunning. Not only did it lead to improved, even better clinical outcomes than ivacaftor alone, it was capable of treating patients with a single copy of delta F508. That meant Trikafta has the potential of bringing truly significant clinical benefit to 90% of Canadians living with the cystic fibrosis. Trikafta was also important. It was so important that the FDA used all mechanisms it had to review rapidly, and it brought the drug approval ahead by 6 months ahead of schedule. In late October of 2019, the Washington Post described it as the #1 good thing to happen in 2019. To add insult to injury for Canadians, the UK approved Orkambi and Symkevi, as Symdeko is called in Europe, at the same time. Canadians with CF were feeling truly abandoned. And one last thing I do want to mention is that I mentioned that median age of survival for somebody born in 2019 is 52. Bear in mind that for people who are alive today, half of the people who died in 2018 were under the age of 32. So there is still, it is still a very serious disease. It's not like everybody with the disease is living to median age of 52. And I should pass it over to David at this point in time.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for having me. And sorry that's been a little bit delayed. And I join you from actually a very sunny London lunchtime. So I know my kids will be very envious of the snow that's dropped on Montreal, but we'll have to wait for that and probably get a small smattering to try and make a single snowball. But I want to talk a little bit about our experience, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll run through this quite quickly. But first thing to start with, that the UK is 4 nations. And that actually is an important part of this story, because that's 4 jurisdictions in terms of making drug decisions. We have about 10,500 people with cystic fibrosis in the UK, which makes us the 2nd largest population in the world, which owes its origins to what John was talking about in terms of its genetic heritage. And obviously there are different mutation groups in that population, which is pertinent to the medicines that John was talking about. We are trying to achieve overall has been access to precision medicines, and the most recent being Kaftrio. And as John pointed out, helpfully Europe and North America have different names, but that's Trikafta, which you will have heard referred to. But the journey started with Symkevi and Orkambi, or the battle, because actually ivacaftor that preceded them was obtained through an earlier campaign. Again, I won't dwell on this, but this shows the lung decline that we experience, the respiratory failure that is the most lethal factor of cystic fibrosis. And you can see how that progressively declines. And the critical thing about the drugs is their ability to arrest that decline, but also being mindful that they're not curative medicines. And if you wonder why that goes up a little bit towards the end of the graph, that's obviously the impact of survivors, basically, in that some people have passed away, therefore the average position for people will increase to some extent at the end. I thought, to build on John's point, this is a pyramid of where people are at in terms of age demographics over a 10-year period between 2009 and 2019. And you can see that there's a positive move upwards, i.e. chunkier bars in higher ages, but we're still talking about a median age of 21, and in the UK also a median age of death in 2019 of 32, a point when most of us, certainly I was, looking to start out and make some significant decisions in life. That is when people are coming to the end of their life, which, although all of the progression we've been talking about through improvements in clinical care, this remains a critical life-limiting condition that is extremely life-shortening to people who unfortunately have a diagnosis. So we've had a big leap in 2019 and 2020, but that was built over many years, really 4 years of work. And it all started back in 2016 when NICE, which is our clinical regulatory body, said no to Orkambi. And they did it, as John said, on the value for money basis, that they didn't think the clinical improvement was worth the value. And we were at that point deeply frustrated because we knew the clinical benefit would be something that would help to arrest the decline in people with cystic fibrosis, and actually critically act as a bridge to the therapies that we already knew were being developed. So let me talk through a few of the areas of what we were doing from that period, 2016 onwards. And I won't run through them all because I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail. But I think one point I wanted to emphasize is this is very much from our perspective, as in the perspective of the UK Trust. It actually was a truly community-wide campaign. And the planning and coordinating the final P there that we did between different active groups and people across that campaign was absolutely fundamental to its success. But I thought I'd shine a little light on some of the things that we were doing. So firstly, we were very active in policy, and it's important to, as we are the only national UK cystic fibrosis body in the UK, that we got active and thoughtful with the key decision makers, which in the UK are the NHS. We have a single payer system, although it's stretched out across the 4 nations. We obviously also have NICE that I was talking about, which is the regulatory body, and we have Vertex, which is the pharmaceutical company. And we wanted to use the data and that we have from our cystic fibrosis registry, but be a thoughtful and constructive partner in those policy-making decisions, really get into how the decisions made. And that takes expertise and work and ensuring that you have the right skills on your team and you can access the right skills to do it. We also got very active with press and publicity. I mean, first I'll talk about print and then online. It was really important to get out there and start to tell the stories of people's lives with cystic fibrosis, and particularly the hook that this was an injustice, that there was a drug out there that could help people that was being denied to them. And that lands well in the context of a National Health Service, which is there to support people's lifelong needs. But you can see there we've got a piece in The Guardian. We've also got, towards the more popular press, the Daily Express, who were long-standing partners of us through the campaign. We also used press and publicity and to highlight and magnify what remains a significant but a small community compared to some others. We were conscious that although many family lives will be affected by cancers, actually with 10,500 people affected by cystic fibrosis, you're talking about a smaller population, which is why it's important to try and go mass in terms of maximizing with publicity. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there and in the top of the screen, it was very important to get the voices of people who are directly affected by cystic fibrosis talking about what their lives were currently like and what these drugs potentially meant to them. We also increasingly found that the way both to motivate, inform, and to go to scale was to use social media. And I've included this slide because I like the fact that we've got Jenny Agata, who some of you will be familiar with, who's from Call the Midwife and The Railway Children many years before that, who's one of our patrons, and Jeremy Corbyn, who was at the time of this campaigning the leader of the UK Labour Party, both tweeting about the same issue and us using it as a way of galvanizing protest. And protest is important. And as I said earlier, getting out across the 4 nations. So there's us handing in a petition in Wales, outside the Northern Ireland Assembly, up in Scotland, and outside Westminster. And again, we were pleased that we could activate small numbers of people. We want, the larger the crowd, the better. But it's amazing the impact of actually a relatively small number of people directly interacting with the parliamentarians. And in fact, in the top left, we have parliamentarians who are holding some of those placards. And you'll see as well that we've tried to keep our message simple around life-saving drugs now, not getting it, we actually transitioned from talking about the specific drugs because we found that you get mired into elements of explanation. Working with people, this is a slide of lots of happy smiling faces of me, which shows how well some of the meetings have gone. But this is just an illustration of the corridors that we were walking down and the people that we were meeting. The top left-hand corner is up at Westminster again, and we've got various secretaries of state left and right. And in the middle, that's the chief executive of the pharma company. Having access to those people to put directly to them the consequences of the failure to access these medicines, but also to galvanize them into action was very critical, because one of these things is to make this newsworthy, to drive this up the political agenda. And again, another example here, there's a smiling face in this one, because what looks like quite an innocuous cup of tea was a really significant meeting, because the woman on the left was chair of the House of Commons Health and Social Care Committee, and she was able to initiate an inquiry which brought forward the activity in the bottom right there, which is both the leaders of NICE and key decision makers in the NHS with the pharma companies called to give evidence as to why this deal wasn't being done. So they weren't making a view on what the deal should be, but they were drawing out the individuals to explain and therefore go on record as to why people were being denied access to these drugs, which I think was a really important part in driving us forward to a solution. And again, you can see I was lobbying there with the Secretary of State and critically using all the devices that were available. So I know that your parliaments differ, but we have a trigger in the Westminster Parliament that if you get over 100,000 signatures on a petition, which for a community of 10,500 people can be quite an accomplishment, there is a committee that has to consider whether or not a debate is held on the subject. And twice we were able to hold debates in Parliament as a result of getting a petition to that point. And again, that got dozens of politicians talking about it and created campaign momentum, because you are constantly, particularly as we have things like Brexit that we used to talk about, you're constantly trying to actually get towards the top of the agenda to make people feel that this is something that a decision needs to be taken on. Cross-parliamentary support was critical, and this shows how it built. Various mentions and references to the drugs and to cystic fibrosis and the trust built over time. This can take time because you're building pace, you're informing people. You may have general elections where you have to induct and inform new people into the debate. And then we ended up in June 2020 with, I won't play that full video now, but that was the same guy who was health secretary thwarting us 3 years ago, announcing now as chair of the Health and Social Care Committee that a decision had been taken to fully fund Kaftrio, which is a truly transformative drug for all eligible adults in England and with equivalent deals in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. Very briefly, because I'm conscious of time, some things about what worked and what did we learn. People, really important. As I said right at the beginning, this was our perspective, but we worked with lots of different people and lots of parts of the community and other actually external groups and opinion leading organizations. And you would have different tactics. It's really important to remain focused on the fact that you have the same goal, because it is possible to fall out, which I'll mention in a minute. Personal, the engine, the fuel is stories, particularly from the press and the media. What they want to talk about is the individual stories of people's lives. That's what is the leverage into the wider debate. Passion is absolutely critical. You've got to sell this strongly for the reasons I was saying before to get this up the agenda. But certainly from our perspective, we felt that anger didn't work. Outrage and injustice is important, but we felt that anger was potentially toxic to some of the relationships we needed to generate over the period of time that we're talking about. And then persistence is critical because, as I've laid out, it's a long haul, but so is pace. And by that I mean is you can't be at peak all the time. And it's really important that you choose the moments, particularly rallying the community, you choose the moments to intensify effort. What didn't work so well, I think, people, just to the flip side is, rightly, people are very passionate. People right in the heart of this and knowing what the drugs would mean to them and their families. And at times we came close to, having very different views on a particular issue. And I think it's really important that you don't allow that to become a distraction from the point earlier, which is same goal, different tactics. One thing I would caution is to not get drawn into a debate over price. We certainly got pushed on occasion. So, well, if you think it's too expensive, if NICE says it's too expensive, what do you think is the right price? We were very clear that was not our policy. It's not appropriate for a charitable body to be drawn on evaluating the value of a drug. What we are clear is there's a pharmaceutical company that wants to make money on a drug that delivers value for people with cystic, delivers effective difference for people with cystic fibrosis, and a health service that is committed to the health of its population. There should be a way of triangulating that to deliver a result. Now, press is be open. I only put that there because press is can be a double-edged sword. I think it's really important that, particularly when you're working closely with pharma or you engage with pharma in some way, you're very clear in all your public pronouncements and on your published material what your relationship is, so that it isn't misconstrued in any way and you're not seen as lobbying for that company. And in politics, as I referenced earlier, it's critical, don't choose sides. I think it's important that this isn't turned into a party political issue, because I think that runs a real risk that you'll end up on the wrong side of a debate. I also wanted to very briefly at the end reflect on the psychological impact before and after. And that's both during the campaign because of the intensity and the size of the prize, but also actually as we have been successful, it's been really striking about the range of psychological responses that people have experienced, both the elation of getting the drug and it being successful for them, but also the frustration and despair of perhaps not having the appropriate mutation, perhaps not responding in the way that they anticipated, or in some cases, the guilt that they have been around and are able to benefit from these drugs when others aren't. So actually, the mental well-being side of this campaign is a really important one to bear in mind. And that's a final slide, really, just to say that politicians as well, that's our Prime Minister with a young girl who is benefiting from the drugs. Politicians also like success and like to be associated with success. So I think also building the momentum of that campaign with the pace and persistence to recognize that this is something that people will want to be part of, making a difference. Because actually a lot of politicians go into politics to make a genuine difference. And if you can tap into that across party, I think you have a real chance of building the momentum that will succeed. I spared you having to see me during that, but I'll now stop sharing and turn my camera on. So I think we're going back to Kelly now, though. Thank you.
So this is really very, very briefly, I don't want to dwell on this one. This just shows the Canadian approval system. You can see it's complex. It's rather convoluted. One of the things I need to point out, in the same way that David said, UK is 4 nations. The healthcare system in Canada is not a national system. It's actually run by the provinces. There are some federal positions, but mostly it's run by the 10 provinces. And this shows where the different drugs are available. You enter the system up here. Once you're approved by Health Canada for safety and efficacy, you can come rapidly down, and through private payers, you can make it to the public. If you're going through the public, so Canada also has a public system and a private system. So this is the route through the private system for those with private healthcare. And for public coverage, you need to go through a public healthcare technology assessment. You got to go through pricing negotiations, and then each province individually has to decide whether it's going to be putting it on its public formulary before it even gets to patients. I think we'll then move on to the next slide, Kelly.
Great. So as John said earlier, there were different drugs that came at different times. So our work to improve access in Canada has changed over time. In fact, I would say there's just completely different phases. So in the beginning, when we had the first drug become available, Kalydeco, it was beneficial to a low percentage of our community. So there was some interest, but it was limited. And most of the work that was done was really by individual activists. And you can see the mom and the daughter up there. They were very successful and able to get access. Over time, though, as the drugs have become more relevant to more of our population, we've had more of a fulsome and comprehensive strategy. And I'm going to take you through some of our strategies now. Next slide. So a large part of our strategy has been focused on government relations, as David's has as well. Our work has been both focused at the provincial and the federal level because of the way our system is, or what we, if we wanted impact, it would depend on where we came in on it. To impact government, we held meetings with elected representatives, those that we knew we could have influence over, like the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance. We also had our members of the CF community meet with their local elected representatives. That's really important in Canada. Local reps must meet with their constituents and bring their issues forward. And so that was really, as I said, helpful. We had a challenge during CF May Awareness Month, challenging our community to meet with their federal elected representatives so that we could meet with as many as possible during that time. Sorry, my puppy is barking now. We also held lobby days, which means there is a certain period of time when meetings are booked with elected representatives and you draw attention on a particular issue. We conducted letter writing. We had 5,500 letters written to almost 99% of members of Parliament. We also conducted petitions because they will be read in the House of Commons, and it gave us a lot of profile. And with so many people writing letters and meeting with their local representatives, we found champions in different parties, and they asked a lot of questions in the House of Commons It provided profile for us, but it also provided profile for them. So that led to a historic all-party access meeting on TriCAFTA, which had members from different political parties. Next slide, John. We also use public relations to influence strategies as well, or to influence access as well. We use the traditional media by conducting press conferences and pitching to the media. We wrote op-eds and letters to the editor. We leveraged the stories of our community and shared them with the media. And most recently, we had a very successful writing a letter to the editor initiative, whereby our CF community wrote letters to their local papers, and we had 200 letters published. We also found champions in the media, and we ensured to keep them up to speed. And we used social media, and that created a lot of momentum for us online. Next slide. Engaging the community helped on the other two strategies, and also was a very important strategy in and on itself. To begin, we built an advocacy network of trained advocates from coast to coast. There are 250 of them now, and we've leveraged this network to help us do our government relations and public relations. With the interest in TriCAFTA, the interest in the community exploded, and we had to broaden our work to ensure that the whole CF community had support to advocate. So we provided tools for the larger community to use. These included a toolkit on how to participate in the advocacy, a turnkey letter writing online tool, social media hashtags, and shared content. We were a little slow in building our tools for the larger community, and we saw the rise of an informal group of CF patients and families called CF Get Loud, and I think some of you are familiar with them. This group started to fill a really important void that they felt we weren't filling, to push hard and fast for access to TriCAFTA. And while it was really hard for us to think that we weren't doing enough for the community, we know how important it was that they developed, because it was a true grassroots patient group, and that their presence was so important in galvanizing this issue and galvanizing the community. Next slide. In terms of lessons learned, we learned a lot. So in terms of government relations, we learned having a network of trained advocates gave us leverage and extended the reach of our staff. And it is a really big country, so that was really important. Working at the local level was really helpful. As I said, they had to meet with us, and through that work, we built champions who otherwise might not have been given opportunities to shine. Timing is everything. Sometimes it worked for us. We had a big policy change in pricing control in Canada happening, and that gave us a lot of press. And sometimes timing doesn't work. So this picture here shows us having a press conference in Ottawa last March. And as we walked into the room, all the media walked out following the Prime Minister, who had just announced we were in a COVID pandemic. So not always working. Embarrassment tactics, they did work in the early days when advocacy took place for Kaleido, but the pushback was very strong this time around. And finally, an important lesson we learned is we should have brought clinicians into the work earlier. It is very important, as decision makers really truly do listen to the voices of clinicians. Next slide. Regarding public relations, we also had some tricky ground to navigate with respect to the cost of the drug and the reputation of the manufacturer. We learned to steer away from the messaging about cost in the manufacturer, but honestly, it was difficult and we weren't always successful. Being aware that this might be an issue for you might be of some help. Having personal and varied stories to share with the media was really important. It helped to get the interest of the media at the local level and generated a lot of press. Also, we made the issue broader and part of the dialogue on rare diseases and on precision medicines. And this helped to get interest. And I saw a note in the chat while I was waiting about whether we made this a human rights issue, and at times we did. Our lessons learned with respect to community engagement. So the first thing I will say is this: if you have a drug that is truly transformative, or you haven't had a drug for some time for a disease such as ALS, remember that your community will not want to sit back, and nor should they. They will want to be involved, and they should be involved, and they'll want to know that this is a priority for you. We learned that, and that we weren't providing enough communications on what we were doing to improve access. And so we did that. We shared frequent and open communication about what we were doing, what the status of things are, and why things weren't moving fast enough. Also give people concrete action to take. And sometimes that's as simple as using social media. Building a relationship with our grassroots partner, community partner, CF Get Loud, was so instrumental to our work. It was really important that we got on the same message and strategies and work together on our strategies. Sometimes that took us a bit of time to figure that out, but it was worth it. You need to be seen to be working together, or it splinters the message, or it detracts from the work you're doing because people focus on that. And remember, as David said, this work is emotional. It's emotional for staff. It's emotional for your community. And please give people the space to share and emote. Next slide, John. Overall, I'd say this. You need all strategies. You need a comprehensive strategy. So keep your eye on all fronts. Work together and leverage each other's strengths, and keep your head down and keep going. And with persistence, you can get to this. Next slide. This is a picture of our team when we learned that Trikafta was going to be submitted to Health Canada, and we never thought that day would come. So I know your day is going to come too, and thank you for listening, and thank you for putting up with our technology challenges today.
Thanks, everyone. And Kelly, I did want to add one thing. There was a comment in one of the comments about the pity press, and one of the things that we did to sort of not sink into that really was to point out how this was relevant for everybody. You know, as the direction that medicine is going in is that, you know, we're getting better and better at defining diseases. You know, what was breast cancer many years ago is now 20 different diseases. And so we're able to point out that it doesn't matter what disease you have. When there is a new drug coming, it's you know, it's important to get it out to the population. And so this wasn't a CF thing. I mean, the ability to access really life-changing drugs is important for everybody. So, and I have no idea what is just zooming in on me like that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Kelly and David and John. We really appreciate you sharing these stories. I think with ALS, as we're looking at the potential of therapies coming to market, we're getting through clinical trials and we're starting to see some drugs now enter in. Some of the question is, how do you navigate the expectations as well, especially when you're dealing with therapies that aren't a home run right out of the gate? And so what does that mean? And, you know, as you're looking at the dealing with the regulators, you've got the first regulatory decisions, and then you've got the access in terms of reimbursement. So can you give us any insights there as you might have entered into it?
Well, could I respond to that, if that's okay? So
please.
I think there's I think it's a very good point. Because you can be getting in a situation where you're over-promising in that, or perceived as over-promising. I think for us, and I don't know if I think it probably will be similar in your situation. I think the fact that cystic fibrosis is a progressive disease was important. So actually what we were saying is, look, there are drugs available which have the potential to slow the progression of this disease. They're not curative, but we know at the moment people have the burden of care each day, the burden of treatment that John was describing, and these are the best tools available for the clinicians to use that have the potential to slow the progression of this disease and buy time for the next generation of treatments to come. I have to say, in the hands of a sub-editor, that becomes life-saving drugs, or, you know, wonder drug. And actually, there's a bit of shrugging our shoulders of that. It just because actually we also need to be realistic that connecting with the transformative nature or the perceived transformative nature of the drugs is important for the column inches you can get. I think it's important that you have an educational and information strand and going along in parallel. And picking up on a point that Kelly made, the clinicians, certainly in our case, they come on board when they feel that they were a little reluctant to come on board with the first set of drugs, but actually their enthusiastic support for the next generation of drugs was fundamental to the pace at which we were able to achieve that. So I hope that answers that question to some extent.
Thank you. And John, you had mentioned that there was a delay between when you saw the therapies coming to market in other areas and when they came to Canada. How much did you work with the international community to be able to help navigate that? And did you see a difference? Because as we're seeing that for ALS, we're seeing therapies that might be approved in the US, even as we try to get them into Canada, but there could be further delays in other countries. And so how do you navigate that sort of expectation and that change as well? And how much do you use it?
So we're certainly aware of what our sister organization in the United States was doing, and we were learning from them in terms of some of their interactions. I don't know, Kelly, if you have more that you wanted to say about what we learned from what was going on around the world.
I think, well, we shared strategy. We would ask them about their strategies of, so in the US at the time, David he just had learned about Orkambi, I think at that time. And so we learned about what they did up front with the FDA. That will help us now as we meet with Health Canada. I think we also learned sort of about, to your earlier point, about expectations from payers or expectations from the community. And David really has been a really, because they've been one step ahead of us. So learning from what their experience has been has really helped us think through the stage we're in now. David, and in Ireland as well, they've talked to us about how the sadness some people feel because this drug is not for everyone. It's 90%, so it's really exciting, but there's 10% or 5%, depending on whose figures you use, that this won't be for. And so, you know, that's been a big challenge, and we've learned a lot. So while we felt very sad for ourselves and for our community that we have not had any access, we actually have benefited from the learnings from all our other, from the other countries.
There's one other thing that I would highlight, Tammy, as well. What we also did is we tried to take advantage of the situation where we were without a certain class of drug to go to the competitors of the manufacturer and say, you want to run clinical trials on the next generation of drugs or on your competitive products, please come to Canada as fast as possible because we've got a population that's really anxious to get this drug, and we have this naive population that's good to test your drugs on.
Okay.
Could I add a comment as well? Because I think one of the things that I think there's a good comment in the chat there about the work required to get the drugs you need. And one of the things that we've tried to do as we've progressed through our campaign is to work with others and actually bodies in the UK, like there's a charity I'm also involved in, which is across all genetic conditions, to say, look, this is just wrong. It shouldn't be based on the articulacy, or if that's even the right way of saying articulate, the sophistication of the campaigning resources of a particular group of people, because that inevitably is going to lead to unfairness. Actually, you need to have a system that recognizes that these precision novel therapies are coming through and can respond accordingly. So actually what we were going back to what I think John was saying a few moments ago, we to twist my metaphors, we tried to say, look, we're the canary in the coal mine here. We're a very data-rich condition. We have a registry. We know we can track progress. If you want data, we can do post-authorization analysis very sophisticatedly. If you're not funding it in CF, what are you going to fund? And actually, at that point, you start to ask them very deep-seated questions about what the health providing systems are in place to do. And hopefully that we punch a bit of a hole in the wall, certainly in the UK, that others can come through after us without having to work out how much they can wave a placard outside Westminster on a cold Wednesday.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all three of you for sharing. You know, this really helps to build on some of the conversations that we had last year at the Alliance as we started to talk about working with pharmaceutical companies and what it means to the ALS population. And, you know, we're fortunate that we have such a strong international alliance as we have with these meetings today. And so being able to learn from the experience of CF, and I know from our experience of working together with CF and the other health charities in the coalition in Canada, it's made a big difference. And I completely agree that together we can get much further. So I would like to thank all three of you for bearing with us this morning. And now you can take off your tap dancing shoes and go and grab a coffee and relax for the rest of your day. And we are going to move on to the rest of our presentation. So thank you, Kelly, John, and David for sharing your experience. I know that we've learned a lot from you this morning.
Thanks, guys, and good luck with the rest of your event.
And good luck with everything, including getting the drugs approved and to patients.
That's what we will next be shouldering into as we move through the rest of our day. But now we are going to move on to our first presentation from a member organization this morning. So we will have Owen Boussard from ALS Link Belgium, who will speak on how ALS Link Belgium looks to the future. Owen, over to you.
Hello everybody from around the globe. Good morning USA, good afternoon Europe, good evening Asia and Australia. My name is Owen Boussard. As PR Event and Communication Officer from the ALS Liga Belgium, I like to present you how we look at the future, especially in the field of clinical development of new eventual therapies for ALS. In this presentation, I quickly guide you through the promising evolutions in clinical ALS research that is going on today. The fact that you have to be well informed to inform your ALS patients as well. The reliable sources that we at ALS Liga Belgium use to inform us. The monthly meetings with professors we have. The international meetings we attend and organize. How we anticipate on reimbursement and pricing once a new therapy gets market authorization, the challenging times we experience, and the creative awareness campaign ALS Ice Challenge that we have launched. At the end, I will also provide you my contact details. I can frankly say that today we have realistic hope that soon effective therapies will become available for people living with ALS. Since I became active in the ALS community, I have never seen so many pharmaceutical companies having a potential new therapy for ALS in their clinical development pipeline. In the past, this has been clearly otherwise. The only drug that may be prescribed to ALS patients in Europe still is Riluzole, for which the market authorization already dates from 1996. This is nearly 25 years ago. In 2013, we all had hope that dexprimapexole under clinical development by Biogen would make it all the way to ALS patients. But unfortunately, the drug failed in their phase 3 clinical trial. As this was a major drawback, we feared at the time that almost no company would be willing to invest in developing a cure for ALS anymore. But here we are today, with a clear-cut message of hope. Our hope that soon new effective therapies for ALS will be found is based not only on the number of pharmaceutical companies that are developing them, but also on the variety of molecular targets and technical approaches. Here I show a few examples. Some study chemical molecules, others develop antibodies, use stem cells, or even more innovative methods like gene silencing or gene editing. Of course, these promising evolutions are also closely followed by our ALS patients. As such, this is a positive fact. However, their impatience often leads to social media activism, claiming that they want a certain therapy right now without in-depth clinical research. Therefore, we, as a patient organization, should be informed well to be able to inform well our ALS patients. And yes, sometimes we have to temper expectations by bringing the messages that the clinical study procedures as outlined by regulatory agencies should be followed. This is one such example of our communication about a well-known potential therapy under clinical development. To be informed well, it is of utmost importance that you use reliable sources. A good starting point is subscribing to press releases of pharmaceutical companies. By this, you are informed the first whenever a new milestone in clinical development becomes public. Here you find some titles of press releases that were recently sent out by some of the pharmaceutical companies that we subscribe to. To be sure we don't miss any news, we are also subscribed to Google Alerts. By this, we continuously receive all new publications on the internet that contain one of our set keywords. Here you see an example of such Google Alerts notification for either the keywords ALS or MND. However, by using Google Alerts, you will receive a lot of notifications that can amount to 50 a day. Reading and selecting the relevant publications requires a lot of time and a good scientific knowledge. To do so, We at ALS Liga Belgium, we have set up a cell research that consists of a medical doctor and a PhD in molecular biology that are assisted by ALS patients. The latter is very important because he ensures that the information is relevant for ALS patients and that the message brings a good balance between hope and reality. For those who are not yet aware, I bring to your attention that the Scientific Advisory Council of the International Alliance regularly publish briefing notes about the state of art of promising new therapies for ALS. These are very comprehensive and easy to read, as of or non-scientists. Here you see some example of their briefing notes that are published over the recent year. Another recent initiative of the International Alliance that is very appreciated by the ALS Liga Belgium are the scientific webinars. They can be watched live or as recording afterwards. Besides the communication of the International Alliance, we also closely follow the statements and position papers of other organizations that are active in the field of ALS and rare diseases. For example, NCALS, the European Network to Cure ALS, has published a statement on Edarovone and Eurodris. Rare Diseases Europe has a position paper on compassionate use of medicine in Europe. Of utmost value for us is obtaining and discussing the newest development in ALS research in our monthly meeting with 2 professors. Once a month, we gather face-to-face or via webinar with Prof. Philippe van Damme and Professor Ludo van den Bos. Prof. Philippe van Damme is the director of the Neuromuscular Reference Center of the University Hospital in Leuven and an international expert in ALS clinical research. Prof. van den Bos is an international expert in ALS basic research, leading the Laboratory of Neurobiology of Leuven University and VIB. Besides all these initiatives that can be performed locally in our office in Leuven, we also strongly believe in international collaboration to share up-to-date knowledge on potential new ALS therapies. Therefore, we regularly attend scientific meetings. Well-known examples are the International ALS Symposium and the meetings of NCALS, Eurodris, and the European Reference Network EuroMND. On top of that, we also organize scientific meetings ourselves. Most of you might remember the International ALS Symposium and Satellite Annual Meeting of the International Alliance in Brussels in 2014. Over the recent 2 years, we also organized meetings on behalf of EUPALS, the European Organization for Professionals and Patients with ALS. Of course, our work at ALS Liga Belgium regarding new potential therapies for ALS does not end with gathering reliable information and informing our ALS patients about it. As the regulatory agency AMA gives market authorization for therapy for the entire EU, but price setting and reimbursement is taken at the level of the individual countries, we anticipate on those negotiations. To do so, we maintain close contacts with the agencies and institutions involved, which in our country are the Federal Agency for Medicines and Health Products and the National Institute for Health and Disability Insurance. Needless to say that we all live in challenging times due to the corona pandemic. After a first one between March and May, we in Belgium are currently experiencing a second lockdown that started in October, without any prospect yet when it will end. As a result, our offices are closed and all staff and volunteers work from home. I want, however, bring you the message, don't give up, and interconnection is key. We should all keep on informing and supporting our ALS patients. Equally important is that we, as ALS MND associations all over the globe, should keep on sharing knowledge and the initiatives we take. For that, we should all find adapted strategies and innovative solutions. As most of you also We are nowadays using online communication, in particular web meetings, to keep our interaction with ALS patients and researchers going. Besides that, we put a lot of effort in finding creative ways to continue launching ALS awareness campaigns. One such creative ALS awareness campaign that we have recently launched in these difficult times is called ALS Eyes Challenge. Where did this name come from? In ALS, the patient becomes paralyzed. In many of the patients, the eye function remains as one of the last means of communication. That is why we focus on the eyes during this campaign. ALS patients feel abandoned due to the lack of remedy and attention. On top of that, a lot of ALS patients have become isolated by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this way, we show that we still stand behind them and that they are not alone, because knowing that you're not forgotten is extremely important, especially this time of the year. How does the challenge go? As the name suggests, the eye are at the center of the picture. With the arms and the hands, you form the letter A from ALS. You have to challenge your friends, family, colleagues, everybody you know from your social media network to personal life to do the same thing and let themselves be tagged in those pictures. The challenge consists of 2 categories where there are prizes to be won in each category. The first one is the most original one, the most creative picture, ludic picture in a special place. You can do whatever you want, but you have to be creative. It has to be an original photo. The second one is the person with the most tags. So if you challenge your friends, your family, it doesn't matter who, and they participate in the challenge also, they have to tag you in their picture. So the person with the most tags in other friends' pictures also wins a prize. To participate, there are a couple of conditions. First one, you have to take a picture where you can clearly see the official A symbol of this campaign. Your eyes are centered in the triangle of the A. Then you have to share this picture on social media. This can be Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, doesn't matter what. Then you have to use the specified hashtags that you can find on our website. And you have to tag the ALS Liga Belgium. Then you can challenge your friends, your family, your colleagues to do the same. But most importantly, make sure your picture is public. If it's private, we can see it and you didn't participate correctly. As you see in the picture below, the celebrity ambassadors of the ALS Liga Belgium and myself already performed the ALS Eyes Challenge. Now it's your turn. Thank you very much for all your attention. As you see, these are my contact details from the ALS Liga Belgium, and I am open to take your question in the live session. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Owen, for sharing that information about what your organization is doing. So again, just a reminder to all of the people attending today, if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, we can pick it up there. And if anybody wants to raise their hands and ask a question, they are welcome to. Due to the technical challenges this morning, we're going to be very quick on through our questions. So we have time for probably one per presentation as we head out to our break shortly. So I'm not seeing any, but I do have one question for you, and maybe Owen or Evie, you could help us out. So with the ALS Eyes Challenge, maybe you could tell us what sort of uptake you've had, because I think you launched that earlier this fall.
Yes, we launched it in September. In Belgium, there's the national TV radio station, VRT, that organizes like 3 months of public awareness for companies like us or Visit Viz. And then you can submit your action to make awareness for ALS. So that's why we organized it.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for your presentation this morning. We really appreciate it. And now we are going to move to Natalie Russell, Senior Manager of Fund Development at ALS Canada. And her presentation is ALS Doesn't Stop, Neither Did We, How COVID-19 Helped Us to Challenge the Status Quo in Community Engagement. Natalie, we look forward to hearing from you.
Hey everyone, I'm Natalie Russell. I'm the Senior Manager of Fund Development at ALS Canada. Welcome to ALS Doesn't Stop and Neither Did We, How COVID-19 Helped Us Challenge the Status Quo in Community Engagement. For this presentation, I will use ALS Canada's signature event, the Walk to End ALS, to share with you, kind of as a case study, to share with you how you can implement virtual tools and connect with the community in a deeper way. ALS Canada has a mission to improve the lives of people affected by ALS through support, advocacy, and research for a future without the disease. Like many other countries across the globe, Canada responded to the earliest cases of COVID-19 with physical distancing restrictions. We had to quickly change our approach to be more nimble, embrace technology, and inspire innovation to continue supporting the community. For fundraising, that meant reimagining and reevaluating our strategies for generating revenue, and thus redefining our much-loved signature event, the Walk to End ALS. The Walk to End ALS is the largest volunteer-led fundraiser for ALS societies across Canada, raising $4 million each year and $2.1 million in Ontario. For this long-standing event series, COVID-19 offered us an opportunity to make change and fast. We worked quickly to answer the burning question, what will WALK look like this year? In 2020, the Walk to End ALS in Ontario was delivered as a one-day virtual event with a strong, engaging online campaign in the weeks leading up. Our goal was to recreate the magic that makes the in-person event so special, a sense of community and connection, and a safe place to celebrate, honor, and show support for the Canadians living with the disease. Today, I will use the Walk to End ALS to tell the story of going virtual. I will walk you through the 7 guiding principles to pivoting a virtual event and dig into the key difference makers to engaging with the community. So to start off is number 1, make the call to go virtual and own it. With the global pandemic, there was uncertainty in most of our life. When will schools reopen? What does this mean for my job, travel? What does it mean for grocery shopping? With so much uncertainty, we wanted to give our community something to hang on to, something they could rely on. So we made the decision to go virtual and reassured the community that they could count on us. The show will go on. The main point we wanted to communicate was we're still here for you. The event might look different, but the community remains. ALS doesn't stop, and neither will we. So for this presentation, I'm going to go through a guiding principle and then your learning. So for the first one, make the call to go virtual and own it. As the pandemic heads into its 2nd year and uncertainty remains across the globe, solid decision-making will be important for your community, and they'll thank you for it. If you're thinking about going virtual or even a hybrid approach as you head into 2021, your audience will appreciate decisiveness. Just be ready with questions, be ready for questions and with training. Number 2, gather stakeholder buy-in. In an effort to bring everyone along with us, we consulted our key people. We worked quickly to try to change from communicating with them to actually having a conversation. This resulted in an agreement in a single-day virtual event in which we could galvanize the whole community together, keep connected in a time of isolation, and amplify the voices of ALS in a time when everything was so much louder. Together, we settled on June 21st, Global ALS Awareness Day, in June Awareness Month, as the perfect symbolic date to unite as one community. Our stakeholders were critical in the decision-making and the ability to move quickly to pivot the event. We also focused on our top fundraisers. We know 20% of participants typically raise 80% of the revenue, so we sought their feedback and got their buy-in and commitment early, which meant securing lion's share of the revenue up front. I will say it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. We still had to manage some outcry and discontent from people who resisted the idea of going virtual. Mostly, they didn't quite understand what it meant, and they had a lot of questions. Once the decision was made to go virtual, we did 2 other things. We used our organizational voice to reinforce the decision and that the safety of our community is our top priority. And then we managed one-to-one interaction. So as we were having those conversations with people, just explain to them what it meant to go virtual and what the benefit and the impact was of continuing to participate. If you're thinking about implementing virtual tools or changing the course of an already existing event, I would suggest running the idea by your key influencers and partners. Their feedback will be valuable, and their buy-in will be priceless in the change. Others will look to them to signal how they should react. If your key influencers react well, your community will embrace it as well. Or continue building a steering committee with a varied group of people. They can help influence strategy and can help prepare you for the response of the communities they represent. Number 3, embrace technology and innovation. Taking a long-standing in-person event into the digital world was daunting. But what was reassuring was the ability to test. For the first time, we could make change and try new things. We could innovate, and we could challenge the status quo in a positive way. We didn't want to be just another organization email in a busy inbox, but we had to consider email was still the tried and true winner of peer-to-peer fundraising. Keeping that in mind, we tried to find other ways to communicate and engage with participants that complemented email in channels that our audience was already familiar with. So that left us with social media. We used Facebook in particular, phone, and traditional mail. These were the aunts and uncles of the communication family. Everyone was expecting them at the holiday dinner. But we didn't really want to stop there. We wanted to understand how can we actually connect with people virtually and figuratively. And that's where technology came in. So we leveraged Zoom for reoccurring meetings so we could meet people face to face. Zoom was the place we also hosted weekly live stream classes for engagements. We had art classes, yoga classes, things like that. We used GoToWebinar for tailored coaching and fundraising sessions. And then we actually tried texting, both text to communicate with people and then a text to donate campaign. We tried to look beyond the fundraising event and really embraced community engagement as an idea. We focused on building a campaign that would engage people, that would help them feel less isolated during the pandemic. One example was our weekly live stream sessions called Live Well Wednesdays. We went live with an instructor to offer a free class and a chance to connect and see others who were also walking virtually. We made sure to record all of these touch points, anything we did kind of virtually as part of the campaign, and share those after. We did find there was a small segment of our audience that didn't have social media, so we wanted to make sure they felt included, and we continued to share this through email as well. Going virtual really is the opportunity to try new tools or flip a campaign or event on its head, but be careful of doing too much at once. You want to make sure you have enough of the original event so people have some familiarity to hang on to. Your supporters will be open for following the journey with you, but they need reassurance you're there to support them. In our case, we had a strong brand to rely on for familiarity and a community of volunteers, people with ALS, their caregivers, to help keep the dialogue open so that we were hearing both sides and making decisions that worked for everyone. Number 4, focus on hyper-personalized interactions. We identified early that what would be missing from the virtual event that would normally be at an in-person was the ability to actually connect with people, to give your friends hugs, to write on a virtual honor wall. It was critical that we bring this sentiment into the digital world. So how did we do that? Well, phone. Phone allowed us to use data to personalize phone calls to a participant, something like, "Hi Gary, I see you've raised $150 already. Is there anything I can do to help?" We used text. We used a text platform to contact people from our database. These messages were personalized as well, starting with, "Hi, it's Jill from ALS Canada" in the body of the text. And we did this for 2 reasons. We wanted people to feel familiar with us in this new way of communicating, and we wanted to dispel any feelings of spam. Next, we did team kickoffs. So teams represent about 75% of overall fundraising. And so we wanted to make sure we did our best to connect with team captains and coach their teams and participants in how to best fundraise in this new environment. So we had a virtual kickoff. We explained what virtual meant, which was the kind of #1 question that was coming to the top. And we also got to know them personally and helped them plan their fun and their fundraising. Then we had our virtual honor wall. This was the digital solution that connected the virtual with the emotional. It's a social tool that collects social media posts using a hashtag. In our case, it was ALSYIWalk, and displays the pictures and messages. So it collects all of these hashtags and displays it really nicely on embedded into your website. And so it's really a digital version of your in-person honor wall. This was also the link for bereaved families to re-engage with the walk instead of actually coming to the event. The big takeaway for this guiding principle is wherever you can personalize, try to. Peer-to-peer fundraising is personal, so you should embrace that. Data means that personalization can land, but if it's bad data or unreliable data, consider how you can make it personal in other ways. You know, for us, first name in our database isn't always consistent. On phone, we can make sure, because we're going through records one by one, we can make sure we're getting the data right. If we did a mail merge or an email, we wouldn't. And also assess time and resources. You want to make sure the effort to personalize is worth the time you put in. Number 5, have the courage to try new things. COVID-19 allowed us to bring this event into the digital world while maintaining the magic that makes it so special. But it also allowed us to investigate and invest in new technology. Some of the tools will be staples in our campaign, whether the event stays virtual or not. And these tools would have been very difficult to implement otherwise. But we also embrace the uncertainty that doing things this year might work, but also knowing they might not stick. They might not be a forever investment or a forever change. With that, we are committed to understanding and analyzing the success of each. Because we are investing in them, we are testing them. We want to make sure that we can say, did it work and was it worth the money? One of the learnings we had was our text to give campaign. This is where someone texts, you can see it on the screen there, text the word inspire to 45678. And then a donation gets added to their phone bill, and then it gets donated to us. So this was a very low cost campaign to run, but the results were a bit lackluster. We opted for 3 donation amounts, but what it turned out in was a 2-step donation process, and we found we lost about half of our donors before completion. In retrospect, 1 donation amount would have streamlined the process and increased conversions. So although it was a test and we might have to adapt how we do it differently, at least we know how it could be more effective in the future, so not all is lost. So some things to consider. Again, data. If the tool is outside of your database or on a third-party platform, where is the data housed and what are the privacy implications in your country? What is the worst and best case of investing and of testing with your audience? Do you need to build additional resources to make it work, like a frequently asked questions document or any training? And of course, the cost. This is obvious, but is it within your budget? Do you expect to see a return on investment in the fundraising, or are there other benefits you could see, like awareness or stewardship? And then of course, make sure to have a debrief or analysis on that tool or with your team and ask yourself the hard questions. Was it worth it? Did it work? And really be critical, because you want to make sure you're not, that the dollars you are investing, if you have to, is worthwhile. Number 6, create an integrated campaign. Since we made the decision to host the event day on Global Day and in Awareness Month, it meant working hand in hand with our marketing team to integrate messages. We wanted to marry advocacy, awareness, fundraising, hope, and need within one strong campaign. The result for us was a campaign we called 21 Days to Make a Difference. We wanted to be hopeful, accessible, and action-oriented, which would meet the objectives of both fundraising and awareness. So starting June 1st, we would post 1 challenge each day on social media. Some were walk-focused, like Fundraising Fridays. Others were community-focused, Thank a Caregiver Today, or awareness-based, Wear Purple Today. We also armed our volunteers with all of the details ahead of time so they could plan and be ready to support at the local level. We didn't want to lose sight of the importance and value of the community element of these walks. For the duration of the campaign, awareness and event messaging were complementary, and the result was momentum. It was easily shareable content, and it was beautifully designed creative that our participants could see and easily share and be really proud of. This united campaign was the magic to uniting the community. It also helped build excitement towards the final day of the 21 days, the virtual walk to end ALS. A virtual event, of course, means more reliance on digital assets and could result in a noisier experience for your followers and subscribers. So work collaboratively with the rest of your team to ensure you're stepping back and looking at the big picture. What is the experience for the participant here? Can we improve or streamline the messaging, or is there a better way we can work together? These questions are critical because the results are magic if it's done well. This brings us to number 7, event day, strive for excellence in delivery. In an effort to recreate the in-person event, we followed a similar format digitally. We started off with a start line. We had opening remarks from an MC and our CEO, a government official, and a traditional town crier ringing his bell. Brief, but fun, familiar, and welcoming. Then we had our walk. We gave people 1 hour to go walk, whatever that looked like for them in COVID. We encouraged them to share their experience, either pictures or videos with us during that 1 hour on social media so we could see each other across the province. Then we gathered together again virtually on Facebook for the finish line, the virtual finish line. 1 hour of entertainment. We had a magician, a musician, we had remarks from our CEO, we had stories from the ALS community. We kept it to 1 hour because we know how difficult it can be to sit in front of a screen. We embraced the power of being together at a walk for the first time. Normally we have about 30 walks in different communities on different dates across the province. And so this was the momentum of one community coming together and rallying around one day. And tuning in together amid a pandemic for support, for celebration, sharing, and grieving was really, really powerful. I'll admit, even on the back end, there was a lot of tears. All that to say, excellence in event day delivery is the icing on the cake. Event day is what people fundraise for and what they remember when they're signing up next year. So investing in the experience and really making sure that you're doing it right will pay off. So some learnings would be to build a solid lineup and look back with the lens of the participant. Are we delivering what we promised? And are we doing the best to recreate a community event day? Some other considerations, if you do choose to go this route, set a rehearsal for your kind of main event and record it just in case. If something goes wrong with the live stream on event day, you can share your screen and share the recording. Make sure your fundraising website is supported. People will feel the love and feel compelled to donate. And you'll want to make sure your tech team is on standby to resolve any issues. And of course, prepare for customer service. Identify all the ways someone can get in touch. Is it shared inboxes? Is it direct messages on social media? If anyone has any concerns or issues, you can help them resolve it. And if everything goes as planned, you can sit back and enjoy the ride. So what did this all mean for the Walk to End ALS? In our post-event survey for participants, 2 themes rose to the top. People were grateful we had something instead of canceling, and people were impressed with the something that we came up with. Of course, there was little things we can improve along the way, but overall, the virtual event was well received. While we didn't raise the $2.1 million in Ontario that we were planning for pre-COVID-19, we were thrilled with the results. We raised $1.25 million in Ontario in a first ever virtual event. We asked and the community did deliver. We did all of this in 81 days. It might sound like we had precision planning and all the time and resources in the world to make it happen, but this was the remarkable result of a community coming together, embracing change fast, and looking to the future, one we hope is without ALS. Our rally cry remains true. ALS doesn't stop, and neither will we. That wraps up my session, my very quick session on how COVID-19 helped us challenge the status quo in community engagement. I am available live, so if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I would like to thank you very much for joining this presentation, and I hope it helps in your community event, community engagement planning for next year and beyond. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That was an excellent presentation. And from the comments that I'm seeing, people were very inspired by what it was that the team was able to create. Maybe if I could ask you a question, it's really about how do you take this and what do you do with it for the future? And how are you thinking about what's next for the walk as it's such a special event?
Thanks, Tammy. That's a really good question. So we have made the decision for 2021 to go virtual again. We were kind of considering, do we try to do in-person? Do we also plan a virtual? And what we decided is providing our community with certainty is the most important thing in so much uncertainty. So we are going forward with that plan. That being said, our approach across most revenue channels is to be digital first, so that we have that foundation of the ability to pivot should we need to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie. We really appreciate the presentation and for your comments. And for anybody that would like further information, please feel free to be in touch with Natalie. I know that she loves to share. It was a great experience.
Thanks, Tammy.
All right. And next up, we have our very own Nick Goldup, who is going to be presenting on realigning care during the COVID crisis and lessons learned. Nick, we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi everybody,
I
I hope you're all well. My name is Nick Goldup and I'm the Director of Care Improvement at the M&D Association for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. and also I sit as a director on the board of the International Alliance. It's a real shame not to be with you in person today. However, thank you for the opportunity to speak about how we at the M&D Association have realigned our care during the coronavirus pandemic, and also to reflect on some of the lessons learned through this period. Saying it's been a hard year is certainly an understatement. However, we've achieved a lot at the association to support people living with MND and ALS. And I'm really very proud of everything we've achieved as a team of volunteers and staff. Firstly, it's important to start by saying, like all of you, our entire focus has been on how we look to support our community at this strange time. Since the beginning of the crisis, the MND Association reacted really very quickly to the needs of people living with and affected by MND and ALS by implementing what we called our COVID-19 action plan. The action plan was launched on the 30th of March with the purpose of ensuring that the association made the best use of its resources in responding to the needs of the people affected by MND and ALS. And we set about a two-phase approach to this plan. However, for the purpose of today's presentation, I'll talk about both phases together. It assumed that staff and volunteers would work closely together and that staff activities were not restricted by the remit of their substantive roles. In fact, we redeployed care staff overnight across our regional teams, across our head office teams and across our directorates. So I wanted to spend a bit of time today to talk to you through the work that we've achieved so far. Our plans contain 4 key work streams and numerous specific projects. The first area of focus was understanding and addressing, where possible, the needs of people with and affected by MND and ALS by reaching out and making contact. Within a couple of weeks, we'd achieved the wonderful task of reaching out to everybody with MND that we knew of. So that's just under 4,000 people, with the aim to understand their current position, those at risk, and those who needed further support. Hopefully everybody can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now, Nick.
Excellent. It was a bit Benny Hill there for a second, so I'm going to take over live from London.
Welcome to our morning, Nick. Go for it.
Yeah, it was much smoother when I did it yesterday, Tammy. I'm not sure what you're doing today, but you know, never mind. So I'm going to hopefully take over from where I left off. So here we go. So I was talking a little bit about the work streams that we put in place. The first area of focus was understanding and addressing, where possible, the needs of people affected by MND and ALS by reaching out and making contact. So within a couple of weeks, we'd contacted everyone with MND that we knew of. That's just under 4,000 people, with the aim to understand their current position, those at risk and those who need further support. And this was carried out mainly through the telephone. And a lovely statistic to share with you is that 80% of the contacts we made were through our wonderful volunteers. We also sent out over 4,000 letters and emails to people with MND and ALS, which included links to specific coronavirus resources and an offer to support from the association. And a key trend that we saw from this outreach was the desire for ongoing support from our community. And in fact, as a result of this, we now support between 1,000 and 1,500 people with MND and ALS each month who've requested this ongoing support from the association. And during the month of October, 1,326 people were contacted by association staff and volunteers, and that's about 34% of people that we knew, and 84% of these contacts were made by volunteers. Feedback has been brilliant, and just to give you a recent quote, somebody mentioned to us, somebody living with MND said, "Your calls every week have been the one constant with all the things going on, so thank you for your wonderful support." The ongoing contacts with our community also identified support needs and clinical questions that we as an association we needed help answering. And for this, we turned to the experts by creating a clinical expert panel made up of a team of wonderful neurologists and health professionals who gave us access to their insight and advice on a weekly basis. And people needed to know what was happening. They needed to know how it would affect them, how it would affect their care and impact on their loved ones. And this group provided an expert platform to help answer this. And the feedback from our community has been fantastic, and we've been able to provide that through our website. We also invited experts to talk through expert interviews and discussions, which was an informal virtual set of videos to help answer some of the key questions. And this was, again, very, very well received by our community. So as well as reaching out, the second section of our work was to understand and address the health and social care landscape. So in other words, how the situation impacted on services for people living with MND and ALS, and then using our networks to advise this to our community. We wanted to understand the impact on services across the 22 care centres that we have in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and across the multidisciplinary care teams. So we therefore used our regional staff to make contact with all of the centres and coordinators and MDTs and health professionals in a coordinated way. And this was to identify and understand their current provision by the clinical teams locally, and also understand the multidisciplinary teams, specifically on areas such as respiratory and nutrition, palliative care and social care. And this allowed us to have a up-to-date advice at a local level, and also to flag any potential issues, working with local health systems to make sure standards of care for our community were maintained. Thirdly, by supporting people with an affected by MND through practical and emotional support. So this was carried out through one-to-one and group conversations delivered through staff and volunteers, including conversations on the phone and video calls, signposting to other services and other social and virtual networks online. And they included things like mindful and meditation sessions, Tai Chi, breathing, meditation, and fitness videos as well. And that was particularly useful for our carers. We also launched some really practical ways of support, and probably the best one to talk to you about is the emergency grant provision that we had. This was by way of a £250 emergency grant for people living with MND and ALS, and so far we've supported 150 people, and thanks to the Doddy Weir Foundation that we helped us on that in partnership. And then finally, the fourth stream of work was providing additional support for children, young people and families and adults affected by MND. Over the past few months, I should say, we've set up ongoing support calls for families, supporting over 45 families to date. We also began a trial of physical memory boxes for family members to record thoughts and memories of loved ones. And this piece of work was in support with the Nick Smith Foundation in the UK, and we've issued 25 across 4 pilot areas. And just last month, we launched a lovely partnership with the UK charity Bernardo's to provide online and telephone counselling to children, young people and families, which is just terrific, and we look forward to seeing how that progresses. And to promote all of this work, we produced an online COVID hub on our website, which was a go-to place for content and advice, including specific animations, videos and blogs. And do go onto the MND Association website and have a look at that. So all in all, not too bad for a few months, but we're an impatient bunch. And the last sort of few months, we focused on some other areas more specifically. So we knew from feedback that we needed to focus more on carers. It took a crisis to concentrate our efforts, but I'm really glad that we did. So our Commitment to Carers project launched in June, and since then we've been working and gathering information about local support services with a total of 85 information guides, I should say, which have been produced. And this is local information guides to talk to our local communities about support for carers in their community. We've also developed peer support groups online, hosting information and wellbeing events online, and talking to carers about what support needs that they want from us. And to bring this to life a little bit, cumulatively from June until October this year, 616 participants have attended 67 groups supporting on support to carers. And finally, just to say that I would like just to talk a little bit about emerging themes, and the world is changing, it feels, on a daily basis, and the direct impact on health provision is vast. So we are making it our aim to continue to stay close to all the key issues, and these are areas such as appointments and procedures, pressure on health staff, the impact of the second wave that we're in and potentially a third wave, limitations on procedures such as PEGs and access to NIV and equipment, and those sorts of issues really. So we're staying very, very close to those. And of course, how any vaccine that's rolled out can be accessed by our communities as quickly as possible. So what have we been, so we've been working hard, delivered a lot for our communities, but what have we learned? And there's a small handful of things just to sort of reflect on really. So I think in summary, the first one is the speed of learning and change has been obvious. So in terms of reactivity to the crisis, we wrote a strategy and redeployed staff within a week, and it just goes to show how quick we can move as an organisation. It took a pandemic, but we are impatient and we can react really, really quickly when we want to. Virtual support is probably here to stay in some form at least, especially as it removes the barriers of geography. Albeit there is a time and a place for virtual and face-to-face meetings as well. And digital is not a substitute for real life, but I think that's going to be part of our future going forward. Thirdly, we discovered that our services can change. So for example, our helpline, the M&D Connect helpline, now proactively calls out to people living with M&D and ALS rather than being a reactive helpline. And we've also learned how we can utilise our volunteers more, for example, to support through direct contact with people. And finally, communication. We can all, we can and we will engage differently going forward. And I've talked about the expert panel, which previously we met twice a year. Now we can access that group weekly. Plus, we've got lots of internal and external ways of communicating through vlogs and podcasts and webinars and all the other words that we didn't know existed a year ago. We can use all of those in different ways to communicate. So I hope this has been useful and informative. Of course, happy to speak to anybody after this about what we've done in more detail and provide examples. And like I say, please look on the M&D Association website. It's been a tough and busy year. However, during this period, I think our volunteers and our supporters and our staff and the support of the International Alliance has just been incredible. And I know that this continued help will continue to deliver great services for people with M&D and ALS communities in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So
great. Thank you very much, Nick. We're very appreciative of your presentation this morning and for, again, bouncing in. For any questions for Nick, if you could please message him directly, that would be very helpful and he'll be able to respond. We need to keep our program moving along this morning so that we can get to the rest of the presentations. So Andrea will now be up from Andrea Pauls-Bachmann will be talking about the meeting the challenge of ALS during COVID-19. Andrea?
Hello, everyone. This is Andrea Pauls-Bachmann. I'm the CEO of the Les Turner ALS Foundation, based in Chicago, Illinois. And I'm also honored to be a member of the board of directors of the International Alliance of ALS M&D Associations. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. I want to speak about an issue that we've all across the globe encountered throughout 2020, and that's COVID-19. So I'd like to speak a little bit about how we at the Les Turner ALS Foundation met the challenges of ALS by putting patients first. So let me tell you a little bit about the Les Turner ALS Foundation. We were founded in 1977. We're one of the longest serving independent ALS groups in the country. And really we focus on three aspects of how we approach ALS. We focus what we call the 3 C's: care, community, and cure. And I want to speak with you about how we've been able to pivot our offerings to a new virtual format in 2020. One of the things we do very robustly is our relationship with Northwestern Medicine. We've had a 40-year relationship with Northwestern, funding ALS research and supporting clinical care. We began the Les Turner ALS Center several years ago, led by approximately 70 individuals working on research and clinical care. It is led by the director of the Les Turner ALS Center, shown here, Dr. Robert Cal. So let me tell you a little bit prior to COVID, how we operated and what we were able to achieve. As you see, over 2019, which was a fairly typical year for us, we had over 900 appointments at our Lois and Celia ALS Clinic, which is part of the Les Turner ALS Center at Northwestern. We had nearly 1,800 visits from our ALS support services coordinators. These are social workers and nurses who work for the Les Turner ALS Foundation, who meet individuals with ALS in their homes, in hospice, at their clinic visits, wherever they might be, in order to assist them and coordinate their care in between clinic visits. A big piece of what we do also involves ALS community education. And last year, we provided nearly 2,200 people, and that includes providers as well, with ALS education. We also are very invested in funding research pilot projects and clinical care, and we granted over $1 million to the Les Turner ALS Center. So 2020 hit. This may look familiar to you. This is a coronavirus, and we all learned very quickly when coronavirus hit the world that we needed to do and we needed to offer our services in a different way. So in March of this year, COVID-19 became active in the US, and we had 3 immediate areas of concern. We needed to assess the impact of COVID-19 on people living with ALS. We needed also to assure that they had access to treatment. We looked to modify and expand our service delivery and education to people living with ALS. And we knew, because there were economic consequences to this virus, that we needed to retool our revenue streams and to modify our expenses. So in March, as COVID became very active here in the US, the first thing we did was make sure that people living with ALS had access to the most current information about the virus, because it was changing how they lived their daily lives. So we launched a COVID-19 information and updates webpage. We were able to update it nearly daily with information about the virus, about how to protect themselves, and most importantly to people living with ALS, what to do for respiratory care. We also spoke with all of our social workers and nurses and immediately pulled those team members in from the field so they were no longer visiting people in their homes, and unfortunately we could not offer our support groups in person. However, as you see from a picture here of Karen speaking with one of her patients, we were able to very quickly pivot to offer all of our services in a virtual format, and that included our support groups. We realized also in speaking with people living with ALS that there were certain emergency needs they had, and they had to meet them immediately. So we went to our donors, we established a COVID-19 emergency fund, and we were able to issue checks to people living with ALS for very basic needs, for medication, groceries, anything they might need just to get them over the hump. So throughout the spring in this country, there were regional mitigation efforts. Parts of the country were closed, parts of the country were on full lockdown, other parts were fully open. And regardless of where you were in the country, we needed to make sure that everyone living with ALS was contacted by a member of our staff. We identified what their pressing needs were, whether that was a clinic need, whether it was an equipment need, a financial need, a psychosocial need. We were able to assess those immediately. We also looked at our community engagement events, and we retooled all of them to be done virtually. And I'll show you some photos in a moment. The last thing we realized is that our community education program needed to be bigger and broader. So we hired a new manager of community education who came in to revamp those efforts. One of the things she did, and you'll see some photos here, is she did something called front porch visits. And we were able to go to people's homes. It was lovely weather here in Chicago, and we were able to keep our distance and to meet with people in person. And I can't tell you, in looking at Paul here with his daughters and his dog, or looking at Robert's family, how important it was for us to be able to be with people in person, and how important it was for them as well. Over the course of the summer and fall, we made a variety of programmatic changes. We redefined our home support visit program so that the visits we made were no longer perhaps 2 and 3 hours at someone's kitchen table, but they were shorter and they were more frequent, so we could deal with whatever needs were pressing at that time. We also realized in speaking with people that their method or their ways of grieving had changed. Because attendance at funerals was limited, because people could not gather at a worship service, or they could not gather to offer condolences in the same way, that we found people who had suffered losses during COVID had a particularly strong need to deal with grief issues. So we added a therapeutic bereavement support program. We also expanded our Celebration of Life program, which is something we have done every year for 30 years. And this program was so successful, it had a reach of over 3,000 people, all of whom needed to feel connected. And lastly, we launched a new ALS learning series, which is a monthly webinar series. We've already offered one on genetics and ALS, and in another week or so, we are offering one on ALS clinical trials. And you're seeing a photo here of a case conference with many of our support service coordinators, along with nurses from our clinic. Fundraising. Well, we knew that fundraising would change because as an organization, the Les Turner ALS Foundation has always held very well attended events. People wanted to be together. We create community through these events. And that we realized that could no longer be done in the same way. So we launched all of our community engagement events virtually. You're seeing a photo here at the top of one of our board members, Deborah, from Team Mo Better, which is named for Deborah's sister, Michelle. Deborah and her friends were able to walk in their neighborhood, as did well over 120 different teams in the Chicagoland area for our ALS Walk for Life. It was a tremendous success, and we were very grateful that people still wanted to be a part of the community. We also reached out to our major donors and started on a very quiet sustainability campaign. And we were very pleased to see that our major donors raised approximately 20% of our budget, just wanting to help us out, to get us through the year. And we very carefully cut expenses so that we were able to stay very healthy from a revenue perspective. There's also a photo here of our All In for ALS Casino Night that was just offered recently through our Young Professionals group. They've done this for over a decade and they still wanted to gather. We were able to do it virtually and it was a lot of fun. So let's go back to what the 3 C's look like: care, community, and cure now in 2020. We are still providing care. We've got a picture here of Dr. Franz doing a muscle test, a strength test on a patient. So our exceptional clinical care and our support services have continued despite COVID. Our community, we've continued to reach out to our community. You're seeing here a photo of our recent 10th annual Les Turner Symposium on ALS, which Dr. Sabrina Paganoni gave the keynote speech. Dr. Franz, along with Dr. Driss, who's the director of our clinic, and Dr. Wolf, who's our lead pulmonologist, all participated on a clinical conversations panel. And we're continuing to increase awareness and education of ALS. We had over 350 people from around the world take part in the symposium. And lastly, but not least, cure. Here is a picture of Dr. Franz with one of his research associates working on a research project. We are continuing to advance scientific research and therapeutic treatments. So what did we achieve over the course of the year? We saw an increase in our website visits of 55% over 2019. And we believe that is because we were able to offer much better education on our website. We saw a 68% increase in engagement, meaning there were people participating in our support services programs and our educational programs. I think you saw a number earlier of 2,200 people last year. We had over 3,400 people so far this year participate in these programs. We saw an increase in personalized support visits, over twice as many visits. We've more than doubled our visits over this time last year by reaching out in new and innovative ways. And our net operating results have increased by well over 3 times. So we were very pleased with how the bottom line looked as well. And we were able to grant 38 individuals emergency relief grants to help them throughout the pandemic. And so we see that our vision, like all of you who are working to combat ALS across the globe, has not changed. We still have a vision of a world free of ALS. I want to thank all people living with ALS, whom we are honored to support, and thank you for your time today. I'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We were really appreciative. You know, what I'm struck by as I watch your video and as I hear from the rest of the group is at ALS Canada, one of our values is resilience. And it was chosen both because the resiliency that our community has to have, but also that our organizations have to have. And I'm quite struck by that as I watch what your organization has done to be able to navigate the pandemic and to make the changes. If you could pick out one thing as we think about silver linings and learnings from the past year and carry it forward, what would it be for your organization?
You know, Tammy, I'm interesting that you mentioned the word resiliency. What we found in going through this were that the individuals who were least, not least concerned, but whose lives changed the least perhaps, were individuals living with ALS. They showed us their resiliency. They showed us their calm, they showed us their hope, and truly we modeled from their efforts. That helped us tremendously, and we know that that helped the community as well.
Yeah, and definitely. I know we heard from many people in our community to say that we've been practicing physical distancing for years. It was a way to be able to maintain our health. So it's been important to be able to listen to our community in this, and as we've helped them to navigate as well. Thank you, Andrea, for your presentation. And again, if anybody has any questions, please connect with Andrea through the Networking Hub. You'll be able to do that. And now we have about 8 minutes before we go live with ALS M&D Connect. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to, break away from the screen for a few minutes, take a bit of a break. You're welcome to go into the Networking Hub and be able to chat with some of our sponsors, but please make sure that you're back in the hub and that you're connecting back into ALS M&D Connect, because we will be live there in 8 minutes. So see you at 9:15 Eastern time, or whatever that corresponds to in your world. And thank you to all of our presenters this morning for excellent presentations, as they've given us a lot to think about for our ALS community as we go forward. And we will see you back here in just a few minutes.